Good evening and welcome once again to Plain Talk. And as you can see, the program tonight is called Rapping with Clinton Erling. Of course, Mr. Erling is no stranger to the public or indeed to Plain Talk. He was very prominent, we all know, and I'm not advertising for him, but Germans, famous for their soup for decades. He was in the Georgetown Chamber of Industry and Commerce. He established Blue Caps. And then, to many people's surprise, and no doubt he will explain this evening, he went on the PPP slate for the May 11, 2015 elections. I will be talking with him tonight about his own decision, what is his relationship with the PPP now, what he thinks of the APNU AFC coalition, and I will try to get his take as well on the state of the economy, given concerns being expressed that the economy needs a fillip, it needs a boost, and that it's somewhat at a standstill. But before we go any further, let me welcome Mr. Clinton Erling, dapper as usual. Clinton, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chris, and good night to your viewers.
I recounted a moment ago your own development, scion of a very successful indigenous Guyanese business, Germans famous for decades for its soup. You've taken it, I think it would be true to say, to a new level. You were very prominent in the Chamber of Commerce. You established Blue Caps. And then perhaps to many, you announced your support for the PPPC political party. Was that a conviction decision?
Chris, you put the context over correctly. I've been involved in civil society work for the past decade. I'm still young. I'm 35 now. But
you look long young, but let's go.
But at 24, I started with the Chamber of Commerce. Currently, I'm also the chairman of the Ghana Football Federation, in addition to some of the things you've mentioned. And with those organizations, the Chamber of Commerce and with Blue Caps, they were both policy-driven and policy-advocate organizations. Private Sector Commission, Chamber of Commerce, dealing with private sector issues. Blue Caps was more general on different policy issues. But to really effect change, from what I saw, we can advocate and those organizations can advocate as much as they want under the previous government. But to actually implement policy would have required you being a part of government or being a part of the legislature where you had a say in terms of what policies got through in terms of being implemented. There were many issues over the years at the Chamber of Commerce which I've noticed and witnessed that. We developed during my tenure what we call the 20 barriers to competitiveness.
Yes.
And it was very difficult to even get one of those barriers, one of those initiatives implemented at the time. So for me, the logical extension was to get directly involved into politics, and to do so, and you look at Guyana's political landscape, we only have two major parties. It's the PPP, and you had, the PNC or the APNU group. At the time, I could have gone anyway with both parties. My view was never a short-term view in terms of making the decision. I said, look, I'm 35. The current president, Granger, is twice my age. So if you look at it from that standpoint, I still have many years if I intend to stay in the political arena. So I said, starting over with the PPPC, looking at the direction, win or lose, I would have stayed in the party and try to effect the changes and become part of the new generation of the PPP. The PPP had, or still has, a rich history. It's one of the first political parties. It is the political party that fought the anti-colonial struggle. So I thought it would have been great to start my political career with them. But to my surprise...
Let me interrupt, because we'll continue, but I just want to interject this question. Why did you select a political party that has as its central tenet Marxism, Leninism, and democratic centralism, which is not what Western liberal democracy would be all about, and that people would have tended to associate you with.
Chris, I always say, look, if you look back and you look back at what parties have done in the past as a benchmark as to how they perform in the future, I think after you look at 92, when the PPP came into government, if all the folks had abandoned and said, look, because of the history of the PNC, let's not be a part of the PNC movement. When Granger made his decision to join the PNC party, I'm sure he received some criticism. Why did you go with the PNC? I think you always look forward. You always look and say, if I'm in the system and I'm part of the structure, I can make some of those necessary changes from within the structure and create a new party moving forward. The whole democratic centralism issue is something, I'll be honest, I underestimated and thought, look, younger people coming into the party and moving away from the Jagdeo era, we would have seen enormous changes, even more so when the party lost the elections. I felt here is a bigger opportunity because, like I'm saying, if I said within a month, I joined the party in April, just a month before the elections officially, and I've said, I can't influence the outcome of that elections. That elections wasn't on me, Clinton Orling, coming in because I wasn't part of the government previously to that. And within a month, not much of an impact I could have made in terms of the outcome. So win or lose, I was willing to stay on with the party on the conditions that even if they lost, the party would have looked to go in a new direction. If you look at what's happening now, and maybe we'll touch on that soon, if the party had stayed on a course of renewal and looking for new faces, new people, I think you would have seen a different aggregate and composition of what's going into the parliament, and you might have seen some changes in the structure. But the whole issue of democratic centralism, I think even in the PNC, it used to be that way. And then you see leaders like Granger coming in there and saying, look, let's move to a model where there's coalition. And that's how the APNU came around. And he starts to change, and within their own structure there, they start to change a lot of the things. So from within is where you make those changes. And I think as Guyana move forward, most of those models are outdated models, and eventually you will see them just fall by the wayside, and they won't have a choice but to embrace the democratic structures, because the centralism thing, you can see it. You can see with the PPP, you can look at the composition of the current members who they've selected for the parliament. I don't think that's sustainable eventually in the long term.
You keep speaking, you said, I would have stayed, which I don't think you've made a public announcement. I've severed my relationship with the PPPC. Have you done that?
I've severed my relationship currently with the PPP. I've said what I've done. I've written and I've spoken out on the issue of the influence of the former president Bharat Jagdeo and his grip on the party. That is something I totally underestimated, the level of that. And within the party structure during that period that I was there, lots of people would have said, party members and even people sitting on the central committee, there were lots of criticism of the way he conducted himself during the campaign. And then when the party lost the elections, some were even very optimistic, and they said, look, this was all on him. But nobody would dare say to him directly to his face, this is some of the things, or these are some of the things, or the way they're feeling about some of the issues. But he totally has a grip. And I think after they lost the elections or realized they lost the elections, I think for a moment there was a shock within the party as to how to proceed. And the only person who at the time showed some leadership and grabbed the party by the horn was the former president. And he took firm command and firm control. And that was something that I found disappointing. And I wasn't willing to be part of a structure where the party would have been led by the former president.
So your dissatisfaction is really based on personality, the personality of Bharat Jagdeo, personality and person, as opposed to any fundamental issues with the PPPC.
Well, the issues with the PPPC in terms of their plans and their policies and their manifesto, I support, and still to this day I can embrace some of the plans and the policies that they had in there. There were lots of issues. If we touch on the corruption issues, there were lots of issues and incidences of corruption in the public realm. I've always said, and I know now they quote me all over social media, we need to see the evidence before we can say definitively that these guys were corrupt. Now I say to this government, who's in power. They've been in power for 3 months. And I say this all the time. When I said show the evidence, persons who are pronouncing they had it. Now that the government is in power, and if they have the evidence now, and they have all the opportunities, there's many audits, many investigations going on currently. I look forward, and I hope the government will actually, if they have the evidence, charge, arrest, and ensure that they go through the system.
Whoever they are.
Whoever they are. Whoever they are. If the evidence points that members of the previous government were involved in acts that tried to defraud the state in any way or were corrupt, the government needs to take stern, strong actions against those individuals. And I think no exception should be spared to that.
So you don't consider what is taking place now as witch hunting, do you?
I don't
because
know.
We've heard that
I haven't
accusation.
seen, but I haven't. There's a difference. The witch hunting extends to firing folks from certain critical positions in the public sector, where government has control, and people are talking about that. That's more where the witch hunting is coming from. In terms of the investigations of some of those committees, some of those groups, semi-autonomous agencies and so forth, parastatals, I don't see that as an issue, or I won't call that as witch hunting. That's the government trying to do some verifications of what took place under the tenure of the previous government. And if there's any wrongdoing uncovered during the investigations, I think those persons who are culpable should be prosecuted.
You took quite a bold decision, given the nature of your business. Yeah. Lots of your customers are probably not PPP supporters. You wouldn't say the majority of your customers were PPP supporters, would you?
I don't know, and I can't tell.
Did you see a fall off in business after you announced that you were on the PPPC slate?
To be honest with you, I've said German's Restaurant is an institution. And from the experience of what has happened, the restaurant is bigger than Clinton Erling. The restaurant has been around for 55 years. Even if we had a drop, I think the drop didn't come the month when I announced in April. Up until elections, we didn't see any fall off in terms of our performance at the restaurant. A lot of the maybe 10%, 15% fall off came post-elections, post-May 11. And I've always used Germans over the years as a barometer to measure how the economy is performing, because a lot of what we sell, it's Creolese foods. You know, when economists talk about a basket of goods trying to measure inflation, we sell those goods. We sell those foods at our restaurants. So we buy and we know what the prices are out there in terms of inflation, and we see also how consumers spend. So post-elections, I was saying after the first month, something is wrong. I've never seen the economy to this effect. It's starting to rebound now somewhat. But the restaurant, it's just a 10-15%, but I can't tell you if it's because of me. I think I probably lost a few customers, who knows, because there were people going around there saying about boycotting and so forth. Which raises another issue, Chris. We don't have a mature political culture, and it's something that has to change. And I firmly believe, I always see our leaders, even the current government, has to show leadership on these issues in terms of bringing our society back together.
Because you're free to choose the political party.
People
Your constitution says that. That's your constitutional right.
It is your constitutional right. And when we talk, the previous government, this current government, during the elections campaign, they talked about inclusivity, bringing everybody together. But I think we need to see more leadership being shown on behalf, and I think it has to come from the president more than anybody else. Bringing the Guyanese society together, raising the level of the discourse when it comes to politics. It shouldn't be seen as life and death situations, in the sense that Clinton Erling decided to join the party PPP because he felt going forward in 5-10 years, when I could really make an impact, I can change the way the party structure is. Folks are saying, oh, we're not going to support him, or we hate him. I don't see politics that way. And even though I had joined the PPP, my outlook...
You had joined the PPP?
No. Joined them in terms of being
yes,
a candidate. Everything is just a candidate. I was never a member of the PPP. But I've always maintained my objectivity and the way I look and view issues. And I say that even today, and this is a culture we don't have, Chris. People see if you belong to one party, for the rest of your life, apparently, you should belong to that party. Any position, if your position aligns, an objective position aligns with, let's say, the government today, and I say it publicly, people will start to say, oh, he's jumping ship, or
Yeah.
he's doing what I sell at my restaurant, he's drinking soup. And you hear all these accusations, even though what I'm pronouncing is in the best interest of the country. And I always say we need to move
Which
to that
in fact
point.
is probably the more sophisticated element of any electorate.
Yes.
One that judges issues rather than race
Judge
or
issue,
ethnicity or
race,
something.
ethnicity, or party allegiance.
You said that you've seen fall off in business. The private sector, of which you were once a very prominent part, you'd actually competed for the position of chairman of the Private Sector Commission, is calling for a stimulus. Is that an admission by the private sector that the private sector does not do enough to invest and create economic activity, and they really are just living off the national budget?
No, it's not an admission, and I don't agree with that position. Just passing this budget on August the 10th, and I'm happy that the government did not wait until September to do so, and they saw the urgency to do it earlier. That's a stimulus, because for the entire year we've not had any. The government has been running, we call them fumes. They've been running on last year's budget. So for this year, close to, I don't know how much money they will expend into this budget, but we haven't had much public investments nor public consumption as a result of not having the budget. So
But I'm asking you about private investment and private consumption.
well, let me finish, Chris.
Sure.
It's related. When the government pumps that money into the economy, we'll have, that's a stimulus in itself once the budget is passed and the money start to flow. It increases both. On Sunday, there's a columnist called Raul Lucas. I think you used to write in that same space every Sunday. And Raul had an interesting diagram. And the diagram showed both public and private consumption and both public and private investments. And what we saw, and this is why I know and I can argue the numbers never lie, that the economy is in trouble.
You're
And it
arguing
start-
your proposition is this economy is in trouble.
It's in trouble currently. In 2014, we started to see, in fact, government investments and government consumption pales in comparison to private investments and private consumption. By far, I can tell you consumption, consumer spending, private sector spending, and so forth. In 2013, we had about $574 billion being put into the economy through private consumption. And in
When you say
2014,
private consumption, from which
the source of the information from Raw Lucas came from the Bank of Guyana. And in 2014, we saw from 570 billion to 524, a tremendous drop off. So what that showed, and even when you look at the investments profile, public versus private, you always had higher private investments than
that's
public
not correct,
investments.
That's not correct. If you look at the national estimates, in fact, we do this budget focus, and that's something we've drawn attention to, that there is not enough private sector investment, and we hear that look, there aren't enough bankable projects, which is probably true. But
Chris, why I lend credence to it, I'll tell you. In the private consumption barrel, those are tied to certain sectors. And our main sectors in our economy where money's coming, where you can increase disposable income, we're talking about the gold sector. Right now, there's the lowest prices in gold in a number of years. And the miners are complaining. You look at rice and sugar, those two, they're in trouble also. We look at the second highest income earner for Guyana, which is remittances. You look from the period 2013, 2014, you saw a drop off in 2014. A lot of and I've said this to Apne, I've had Cost even write one of the current ministers, senior ones, and I said, look, why are you trying to be defensive? You've been in government for 2 months. Why are you trying to justify that the economy probably is not doing as bad? I said, that's not your issue. There 2 months. The problem started since last year. And you look at those figures and they tell you. So private consumption started to drop because those sectors started to suffer. Disposable income went down. Generally, people started to lay off. Unemployment probably increased. We don't have a lot of that data out there to show it. And then you had
there's a lot of anecdotal evidence as we drive around the place of unemployment.
Right, anecdotal evidence that coupled with the government not passing any or spend any budget for this year and spending less in terms of both consumption and investments, those two factors combined together, we're starting to see the effects of it now. In private consumption also, the black market, this is what's officially out there from the Bank of Guyana. You could imagine what the black market also contributes to private consumption.
To what extent, Mr. Erling, do you think that it's because of the fear of the government, and not fear in a negative sense, but look, you're less likely to get away with illegality under this administration than you were in the previous administration. So people are much more cautious now about borderline transactions.
I don't know. I can't speak to the veracity of that. Some people might be holding on to their money, saying, and again, it comes back to you're saying that government is the one that stimulates the economy. If we were to use that argument that those guys are holding on to their money, and some are looking, waiting, and see what happens. Again, if they hold their monies, it means there's less cash out there into the economy, and that's why a stimulus is definitely needed from the government end. But I would rather suspect it's just a transitionary phase. I think once the government gets its budget out and the government has a clear strategic policy framework in which they intend to work with, for me now it's looking haphazard, but I know it's transitionary, and let's see what the budget says, and let's get an indication of where the government is trying to take the economy.
What the government can spend on when there is no budget. Let us say there had been a budget in January, elections in March. Then you would have had a budget for the year.
Yeah.
And whichever government could have continued to spend, because it's a parliament that passes the budget, not a particular political party. In the case of 2015, there was no budget. We had parliament prorogued, dissolved, elections called. You have 3 months from the date of first sitting of the new parliament to bring out your budget.
Yeah.
As you correctly pointed out, Clinton, Minister of Finance Winston Jordan chose it very, very commendably. Rather than wait, because they didn't meet until June, he had until September to present a budget. And by the time you debate it, you get into October.
Yeah.
What the Constitution actually says is you're only able to spend on public services. So is it partly our constitutional that restriction or restriction?
Yeah, we got to again, constitutional reform is something that I thought and still believes is necessary. So we need to review all the laws, not just the ones that deal with finance, but all the other laws in terms of how we reform our constitution. But I'll say this, in terms of how we see where the economy is going, the government made lots of promises in their campaign. And now they have to keep some of those promises, the 100 days, what you call the 100 days. The only problem for the government in terms of that is you got all your income sources, you have shrinking performance bottom lines for all of those. And then the government is saying with the VAT tax, which is the highest income earner for the government through taxes, the government is saying we're going to cut that also. It might be a good thing or it might be a bad thing, because if you cut that, you might, I have to say might, because I don't know how the private sector folks who actually collect the VAT, how they would react. If there's some elasticity there to show that once you drop the rate, the private sector guys can get up tomorrow and say, hey, we'll drop our prices. We don't know. But that can increase disposable income, but to really...
Lowering the VAT rate. Yes.
Really what this government needs to do come next week is to look at policies in which they can improve consumer or consumption spending, increase consumer disposable income. But the only issue with that, Chris, is how do you balance shrinking revenues and try to increase your expenditure when you're talking about dropping the bridge toll and you're talking about paying public servants significant increases, dropping the VAT and concession to minors.
You know, when I recall, and I think you too will recall, the last time we had a significant public sector wage increase, the Armstrong Commission. There was this fear that, look, it's going to contract the economy, and in fact, it went up. So it's part of it might be just an unfamiliarity with maybe how an economy works and the particular dynamics of the Guyana economy. But whilst you may reduce revenue, or you can lower taxes, and as you know, the experience internationally and in Guyana, when Hoyt reduced taxes under the ERP,
Okay.
revenues actually went up. So it does not mean lowering of taxes does not mean revenue will go down.
Go down.
Because people might say, well, look, it's not going to be worth my taking the risk.
But the VAT, you see, most of the developing countries, and you look at the high-performing ones, I've argued this elsewhere, they're moving away from what you call these direct taxes, and they're keeping indirect taxes.
VAT is an
VAT is
indirect.
an indirect. So when you trouble that indirect one, I'm not a big fan of you reducing that one because you mightn't see a correlation. But to drop a direct, like let's say corporation taxes and so forth, income taxes, direct income tax, that rate should be down to 10% income tax, if you ask me. And the finance minister should probably do that overnight. But yes, I think you'll see a correlation there with more. In fact, it happened in Guyana. When Ashney reduced the corporate tax rate, I think it was 5% the last time, about 2 years ago.
Yeah, it doesn't carry
He actually saw an increase in the revenues from the corporate world.
That's not unusual at all.
Yeah, it's not unusual. So, but Chris, I'll tell you also what government needs to find. I see they've reactivated what you call a tariff tribunal at GRA. I've been arguing this point, and people think I argued because I'm in the food industry, but that tribunal, and I want to talk to them, they need to review the tariffs on imported meats. Mm-hmm. I've always argued currently, and I'm in the restaurant industry, so I'm passionate about this one because I know the effect it has on consumers. I'd use just chicken, but it applies to everywhere. You can't bring in chicken right now. It's illegal to do so. You need a permit if you want from the, we call the Ministry of Business now. And the rate is about 200% if you do get the permit to do it. But it costs the average Guyanese now $400 a pound of chicken. I can import chicken, foreign chicken, pay the CIF, put a markup on it, and at the extreme level, sell it for $200 a pound. If you take just one, let's you assume we got 200 households in Guyana, and you just want to assume each household consumes 1 pound, just 1 pound, at $200 a day, at 200,000 households.
Yeah.
You do the maths, and you can see the government can put disposable income without touching much of their tax, because they can increase disposable income significantly, bring the cost of living down for consumers immediately by doing that. You might see restaurants even expanding more, and so you might see the little barbecue shops at the weekends coming back into Guyana. That used to be a regular feature. The only thing with tariffs, they put them there because they wanted the local infant industries to grow.
So you have
but that experiment has failed.
Well, but what do you do?
There's one or two, the poultry one I can tell you, there's just one or two big players alone there. Even the beefs, there's only one or two big players, and because they don't have any competition and they can't supply the market the way the foreigners, the foreign imports would, you find the prices are high, demand and supply.
But you recognize that you do have to provide jobs and economic opportunities for the rural areas, even the urban areas where the small person can't find it, probably is not well educated enough to get into the workforce where there's a decent pay. Isn't that a big challenge for this government, as it has been maybe throughout the PPPC?
That's why I've argued, look, disposable income, people can spend it in two ways. They either spend it back, or some people would save it and use it for investments. If people know that they can save on all these different, if there's savings and there's higher pay in terms of salaries and it's done right, but the government has to, in the meantime, ensure they create the conditions and truly try to diversify this economy. This dependency on these basic commodity products and depending on the international markets is putting us into trouble, Chris. And if we don't address diversification seriously,
as you're saying now, yes,
and attracting investors, you can't create the jobs you're talking about.
I just want to make one point. I'll go back to that issue you're raising. We talk about you want to increase some expenses. You have commitments on decreasing the rates of revenue, but you can also reduce some kinds of expenses and release other kinds. We know when if you look at what has been happening, what has become known, the PPP had a tendency to spend.
Spend
So-
a lot.
And so some of that can be cut out. One hopes, and we really hopes, that the APNU AFC coalition does not use the PPP base
As their benchmark.
as their benchmark. That would be terribly dangerous. I saw an action brought by Mr. Clinton Collymore against the government for terminating his services and the allowances these people get. I mean, and one hopes. We had heard, thankfully, the APNU AFC said
Yeah, no.
this is not true, that we weren't planning all these big increases. We don't know whether that itself is true.
I hope it's true. I hope they do not consider.
No, they probably were considering it.
Yeah.
They got a lot of flack because it was completely unacceptable that a party that came into government with these kind of commitments should suddenly start asking.
But
for these.
Chris, the fear for me with what I'm seeing happening now with the government, I saw just before I came here on the program, they're looking to review some of the committees that they've established. The composition of those committees, they've come in for some severe.
Which committees? You mean boards?
The boards, the
Sorry.
boards, yeah,
Yes.
the national boards, they've come in for a lot of criticisms. Even some private sector organizations, I've not even seen some people on some of those committees and boards. The way it looks from outside is as though the government is stacking a lot of these boards with persons who supported them during their campaign. But there's this sense, and I can excuse them because they're just there 3
But
months.
that's not defensible.
No, but what I want to talk about, Chris, is it looks as though there's no clear policy guidelines in terms of how they arrive at these decisions. Because one day you're saying, this is our boards, these are our boards, these are the compositions of those boards, and then today, because of public criticism, you're saying, no, even the one with the salary increases for the ministers, I don't know who's advising the president. Like, that should not have even came up as a discussion issue within this party, at least not now.
And
Being
they
a new
took-
government here just 3 months.
And they took too long to come out with an emphatic statement. As a matter of fact, Prime Minister Moses Nakamuto actually suggested it was under consideration.
And the finance minister.
So you wonder, you have to wonder. This is why I said, what is the truth? Is it that they were in fact considering it, and then with the flack they've decided to pull back?
I can't speak definitively, but the way it looks, the government is putting things out there into the public domain. See the reaction, and I'm not a fan. I'll tell you the honest truth, Chris. You run any organizations. I've run many organizations, and even football might seem trivial, but it's the biggest sport, and we're talking billions of dollars both here and internationally. But I've always said you should move away from just reacting every day to what the newspapers are saying, and focus on a clear strategy and a clear guideline as to how government makes policies.
All right, so
I don't get the sense now there's some cohesion there with this government yet.
funny there is a Ministry of Cohesion.
That
tell me the-
ministry needs to pull. I don't know the functioning of it, but that ministry probably needs to pull together. I can tell you, in some countries in Africa, Botswana, for instance, there's a Ministry of Implementation. They actually pull together all those different proposals from all the different ministries, and that ministry is responsible for ensuring there's uniformity and implementation of all those decisions, as opposed to some haphazardness. You've seen in this instance now, one minister would say something and then another minister got another position, or maybe they cross in turf because their terms of reference aren't that clear.
One notices as well, even the same minister changes skin one day from the other. We had heard Mr. Trotman was Minister of Natural Resources and the Environment. Now he's Minister responsible for governance only. That creates a lot of confusion.
And yeah, even with the natural resources, he's still managing a part of that portfolio. And then you have Gary Best there as an advisor. I think they will sort it out. But I think for me, coming from a business background, and I've always argued that running any organization is simple, but it has to start. You have to do an assessment of your systems, and you have to manage by systems.
When you know it, anything is simple.
That's how it looks to me. But it's not. For a lot of people, it's not. And I think even I think with this government, if they're not sure as to how to proceed in terms of managing the economy, they can reach out to either local experts, the diaspora, or reach out to academia both within the region, or they can look internationally. I can tell you schools. I just came back last November. I was at Harvard doing a course called Emerging Leaders. And I can tell you the professors there, Matt Andrews and some of these other guys, even Ricardo Horstman that wrote Help Us to Write Our Competitiveness Strategy. These guys would love to come to Guyana, these countries, and help us, work along with us, even send some of their students there. Yeah. Because it looks good on there.
Absolutely.
It's a win-win scenario.
It's a good case study. It's another basis
and you don't have
for another publication or a book or a thesis. We'll get to this question of diversification of the economy, which I'll tell you, you mentioned your age. And you're about half Granger's age. You're also half my age, so that I'm not pulling rank on you, but I can tell you, we've had that problem even before I've been taking any interest in matters. Before we get there, and for me to ask you and put you on the spot as to how you think we can diversify this economy if decades and decades and new leaders have not been able to do it. What do you think of the PPPC? Reluctance to go into the National Assembly.
You want me to deal with the diversification or
no? The PP. We'll get to the diversification after.
All right. PPP with the National Assembly. There's no. The sense I get from the PPPC now, with this leadership, there's no sense of we want to cooperate for the best interest of the country. They look at their role as being, we need to criticize everything the government does, and we need to at all times pander to our base, ensure we say things that would get our base riled up. That's why you keep hearing all these things about witch hunting, and you still might hear a few things about racism or so being shown in there, because you're pandering to your base as opposed to pandering to the national interests. I've said any responsible opposition and the PPP, if, for instance, somehow I was involved in the leadership there, I would have encouraged them to say, hey, we don't have to disagree with everything. It's a new government, let's support them. If their policies are helpful, we support and endorse. I was disappointed, for instance, to see them initially saying with the Venezuelan controversy that's going on now, them saying, we stand firmly with the government. And then just a week ago or two, here they're saying Granger has mishandled the entire situation. And I'm saying the government can't, this current government can't all be doing, every action can't all be wrong. There might have been some missteps, but they should have shown the inclination to be a mature opposition. You go to the National Assembly, which you are elected to do so, and even in your public pronouncements, state that you support the CCU. And if you don't support a particular course of action by the government, put out your alternative there to the public to say maybe this is the way we think it should have been done.
So
and I think over a period of 5 years they could eventually build some goodwill, because they're based the way Guyana's politics is conducted. The PPP only lost by 4,000 votes. People fail to realize that. They think it was some big landslide, they will always have their base, and if they can show some maturity, I think in a short space of time the party could have probably regained some voters. But the way in which they're approaching it currently, I don't see that happening. I think with Jalgio now as the party leader, I think that's a backward and retrograde step for that party. And he mobilizes the base, but he also mobilizes the opposition base also.
You welcome their announced return. Dr. Lunchan has indicated that they should be going into Parliament, either for the budget or for the budget debate.
Chris, Parliament, I'm not a fan of the Parliament, the way I'm not a fan of Guyana's political system. That's why I've always argued for constitutional reform. I'm not a fan of the current PR system. I'm not a fan of the way in which the party controls who enters the Parliament, who does the representation. I would have preferred the list system. List PR system. I would have preferred a first past the post constituency system. But that's not the thing. We have what we have here. All that can happen now, and the PPP has shown they don't really need the Parliament, because they can go to Parliament and all they'll do debate. If the opposition wants to pass any bill, they will pass any bill because they have the majority there. Nobody's going to
the opposition wants. You mean
the government? Sorry, the government with the majority now. The government is never. Nobody's going to break ranks, because if you break ranks, the party leader in that party could recall you at any time. So you have really, I call it, it's a rubber stamp Parliament. And what the PPP has shown, they haven't been to Parliament for the past 3 months. But Rohi would go out there, I think, on Monday or Tuesdays and hold these press conferences, and the entire media corps would show up, and he has a national audience there to push and peddle the party's positions. All they'll do now, they'll use the whole National Assembly as the platform, and people think there's some sort of real debate going on. I was happy with the last construction of the last Parliament when you had the opposition then, had the majority, but it was a missed opportunity by both the president then and the opposition there. The whole bipartisanness and them coming together and working that was the best, one of the best moments. 2011 produced one of the best moments, and I think it was a squandered opportunity. I don't
For
know
everybody.
yeah, everybody, the country as a whole.
Let's get back to this mantra that we need to diversify the economy. This word you hear all the time. You need to diversify sugar. You now hear you need to diversify rice. How do you diversify this Guyana economy, given the economic realities of very small internal market? You're a high-cost producer of many items. You're competing in a very international arena now.
Mm-hmm.
You can hardly stop. You can hardly say, I am going to block this or block that from coming into my country. How do you diversify this economy?
I view diversification the way I view my entry into politics. And when I hear the criticism from some people, even some friends who will say, you made the wrong decision, you joined the wrong team. And I keep thinking, 5 years will come, 10 years will come, 15 years will come. If we're talking, are we serious about diversification? And you've said it for all these years since independence or even before. We need to start creating and crafting that plan, that long-term plan, to make diversification a reality. It has to happen. What happens is basic commodity goods, they're susceptible to what we call the exogenous price shocks. You look at even the oil producers now, they're crying because the US gone and with the shale and whatnot and the OPEC cartel not releasing more. So you find oil prices gone. The economies, even in Trinidad, they're crying now. The cost of oil is below. We need to ensure high productivity. When you start to add value, you hear the big discussions now in the forestry sector. You hear the discussions now at with even Gaisuco. There's models with agro-processing. Guyana is uniquely, for instance, I would start with agro-processing. You go to Africa again, the examples are similar to what's happening there and here. And what they've done, the government has attracted foreign direct investment. Some of those big companies, the Dole and some of those, these guys will come in, they will be in the center of the process. At the back end of the process, there's the farmers there. They will have to provide some of the funding necessary to those farmers, help them with the phytosanitary requirements, the standards, and so forth. And then those companies themselves also know, because they're big global conglomerates, they have the markets already established. Guyana has the example of being on the coast. It's English speaking. Comparatively on the global market, the price of labor is very cheap here in Guyana. I'm surprised that I'm not hearing more of diversification or serious attempts at it. I would have wanted to see even in this budget some hint that we're going that route, as opposed to what I'm hearing mostly now. It's about handouts. We need to move away from this whole issue subsidizing this and handing out this. Why we do those things? We do a lot of it because we want to pander to our political base. I've always said I'll make a bad politician, and I already think I'm proving that. Because for me personally, I'll always make administrative and sound management decisions over political decisions. If I was to comprise my political party, my government, a lot of the people who campaign, unfortunately, might not make it into the management.
You talk about when we talk about diversification, we talk about adding value, we talk about new products. Gaisuco had tried a very, very noble effort at diversification with other crops, aquaculture. We've had talk about we should ban the export of logs going to furniture making. In gold, we should be doing jewelry, etc. The fact is, what has stopped the Doles and those big entities from coming into Ghana when we know Yabai Shanlin said, look, I go in there, I'm going to get logs.
They just came for the logs. They added no value.
But that is how investors generally see small countries? How do you overcome that perception?
Let me tell you something. The economic literature, that's why I like unorthodox economics. What they told you to do in the past is to focus on your natural resources, your natural endowments. And countries like most of the third world countries believed in that narrative. The ones who did not believe in it was the Singapores and some of the Asian countries. But these guys said, wait. Yeah, we have the natural resources and we can exploit that. Fine, we'll do that. But we need to, and that's why I talk about long-term strategy. It needs to start with the education system. You need to create, and not just create the education system or the people, the human resources. We need to find ways to attract and keep them here. You need to offer them incentives for them to stay to develop this new industry. High value productivity brings in more income. What Singapore and those guys
But that requires a long-term plan.
That's what I'm saying, Chris. What these guys did, what Singapore did, or in the 60s or whenever it was, is to say, look, we're not going to focus on commodities only. We're going to go into the same markets that the Americans and the Japanese and so are telling them not to go into, create computers, technology, high knowledge sectors where we produce in value-added items. And once they did that and they started to sell all those technology to all the countries, the foreign income earnings are tremendously more than and less price elastic than those with natural commodities.
It's probably, and we do hear a lot about the Singapore model. We hear as well that in the 60s we were in the same place.
We were the same place.
Singapore.
Yeah.
But
don't let's go to Singapore. Let's go to African model. I can tell you most of the African countries received independence around the same time with us. I love Botswana as an example. Look at their per capita income and their development levels now compared to ours. Ours is $4,000 per capita here. Those guys now are at 18,000, 20,000 with the economy growing. Examples are out there when you see investments into human capital, human resources, and into value-added, high-value production. For that to happen, it doesn't happen by accident. And like you said, our private sector is not as developed to make those big investments. It has to come from two sources: foreign direct sources and government sources.
But we also, and this is going to take us into an area that you've been prominent about. Our banking system is awash with money, uninvested money.
I am not a fan. I'll be honest, and the bankers might not like me after this. That's why I don't intend.
You're not into popularity.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm not a fan that the government in our country, we don't have a lot of control with monetary policy and interest rates and how the banks operate. The banks operate like an oligarch currently. Yes, you'll hear about competition. There's about 6 of them, and they all price, they all market everything similarly. So you'll think it's a monopoly, a one-off kind of thing. These guys need to do more. These guys, even with the worst economy, Chris, we can go back to all the years, even last year, everybody's saying the economy is dropping last year and this year. But I can guarantee, I've already started to see quarterly and half-year reports, and the banks are all telling you they're seeing either increased profits and so forth. They're consistently doing that. How are they doing that? They're still charging the spread between their deposits and their interest rates. That doesn't encourage. In the US, you drop interest rate. In times like these, when you say the economy is bad, you help to drop interest rates because you want people to borrow more and invest more into the economy. When the banks are doing that, and then the banks are crying, and then they'll use this $60 billion diversion now. You'll hear it, that the government is going to pull it out and we're close to bankruptcy. And then the private sector, our private sector don't question anything. Our commission, now I don't know what's happening with the commission and the chamber, but they really need to do some analysis as opposed to just taking these things on face value because the banker says so. It must be so. And these guys, if the government don't find ways to sit down and talk to our bankers, our private sector, the diversification we're talking about, a lot of it is not going to happen.
Is this a great opportunity for the government to say, no, okay, you guys are complaining that we are saying rather than have a $60 billion overdraft in our central bank and a $60 billion surplus in the private commercial banks, well, we will do a phase arrangement. You reduce your interest rates charge on lending, particularly on targeted sectors that create employment, create opportunities for tax revenues, value added. Isn't that the kind of discussion we should be having rather than just calling for stimulus and no, don't take the money, you're going to bankrupt the system?
I sit there and I look and I see when all the theater is going on and I'm thinking the government needs. When I hear Jordan, the finance, when I hear him talking only about fiscal policy, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, we don't really control them through the central bank, but you need to have conversations with the bankers. That Ministry of Business, I don't know. That and the Ministry of Finance, they should merge the two. I don't know why there's a junior minister in the finance. Maybe merge the two and let them work together. You can't really separate those two currently. They need to reduce some of the bottlenecks in terms of what the competitiveness reports would identify. For instance, to sell a property still in Guyana, it takes you about 3, 4, 5 months. Trinidad, I can do that in less than 10, 15 days. Those are some, and one of the biggest areas, I heard Joseph Harmon talking about creating a special court for minors. You need more justices sitting in a commercial court generally for everyone.
You got one judge in the constitutional court.
One, that's fine. But I'm saying, yes, government needs to start sitting down, and that's why I've always supported the idea. The PPP had created, stole the thunder in terms of the name of it, but the president needs to ensure he has an economic council where he puts the best people, the brightest people. He should chair that council. It must be staffed with a very professional secretariat with some of the best and brightest people from around the world in that secretariat implementing those policies. So he can rightfully now focus a lot on some of the stuff I've seen him doing currently, which is going around the country. And once you have that council, you'll have a more uniform, strategic approach to how you approach your economy.
At least you have a policy.
Yeah.
That takes us to sugar. What would you do with sugar? We hear a lot, and the papers now are awash with stories about privatization, is bankrupt, shut it down. What would you do? And I want to caution. I see Mr. Rohi saying that I'm on for shutting down the sugar industry. You have, in any kind of analysis, you have two types of analyses you have to do. The financial analysis, and if you were to use purely the financial analysis, any loss-making business should be closed.
Yeah.
But there's an economic analysis.
And a social one.
And a social one. Thanks.
That's why I say this. I read E. Supasad this morning, his report to the commission, and I said, look, yes, you can privatize it if you want to do it in a phased approach where in the initial maybe first 2 or 3 years, government is there through a private-public partnership. Again, they need a sound policy on that. The Commonwealth can help them with that if they go to that agency. 2-3 years, government there to help cushion any fall, get the private investors in, but that privatization or that public-private model running professionally based on sound management principles always needs to be coupled with what I call a social conscience. If you don't have a social, because unemployment will happen.
And unemployment leads to crime
in that region. It leads to all those things. So the government has to ensure, and again, government has to create both the enabling environment in those communities to create alternative industries so that so that can absorb some of the unemployment that you see happening there. They need to also ensure there's other social programs in place in those communities as opposed to subsidizing. And I think in time, once that is managed effectively, and now because the government also will incur what we call the cost savings, as opposed to throwing $20 billion into a loss-saving enterprise, that can go back into the community in some other area.
Let me ask you this question. You're a taxpayer. All of us are taxpayers, one way or the other. How much do you believe that taxpayers should be called upon to continue to subsidize any industry or any community?
My approach to subsidies, if your approach is for the long term, for the next 10 years, I say long term, 5 to 10 years, that you have to keep subsidizing that industry or that particular sector, you should desist from doing so. If it's a short term fix that eventually would lead to some finality where it's handed over to the private sector or the entity transform itself into a profitable one, then I can say yes, initially you inject the cash there, and if they can pay you back over the long term because now they're functioning properly and efficiently, do so. But if you know, like the previous government knew sugar was going to always fail with that model that we have here currently, and you keep every year by year bringing a budget saying $10 billion subsidies, $20 billion subsidy, that's unsustainable, and taxpayers should demand that we stop those kind of programs.
The budget, you hinted at the budget. a number of times. Given that this budget can in fact only be a holding budget, and I think if ever we have seen the case for a budget being presented in advance of the year, it was this year.
This year, oh, yes.
We ought to have had a budget. This nonsense about budget being passed in April. Hopefully that's going to change. What are you expecting out of this budget? Do you see this as purely a holding budget? Do you see it as somewhere straddling between a holding and a more substantive budget in another few months?
This budget will actually set the foundation and will also give us a hint as to where the current government intends to take the economy. This government and the budget, I want to refrain from speculation. I'll wait until August the 10th to see what actually happens. But this government over the next year or two has to be extremely careful with those sectors, those commodity sectors in trouble, and them continuing to talk about just handouts and increases here and increases there. Those increases can help in terms of increasing consumer spending, but if the private sector captures all that consumer spending that you're putting out there, all that cash you're putting out there, and the private sector and the banks start to hold that and don't reinvest it back into the economy, it means you might just enrich a few who's holding on to the same cash. And next year, you end up back in the same scenario, and you got to keep spending to do that.
Let me ask you this question about sugar, rice, gold. Shouldn't these people, because these are essentially private sector initiatives, should they set up price stabilization funds so that when prices are high, you just set aside some of your resources, when prices are low, you equalize, and so you don't have the troughs and peaks that are so common with our economy?
Look, commodities are a reality for Guyana. Yes, you need those kind of approaches, but more so, you need to ensure that you start that whole diversification process. And when I say diversification, I'm including the education sector. Instead of a Marriott, I would have been proud if we had that Marriott was the University of Guyana, looking that way with proper teachers and everything. But there's where we need to go to, Chris.
But that's the kind of new thinking. What you want new thinking in the government, you want new thinking in the private sector. You look at those faces, the private sector talking to the government. It's the same old faces you're saying. You did not hear not a single fresh idea.
And that's what I'm saying. And that's when I saw the private sector commission, I could remember telling one of the ministers, you guys have to be careful with some of the things these guys are just saying, because again, it's more of the same. And this government needs to distinguish itself and show that they're serious about development and going towards something different. In 5 years, the economy might mature in terms of our oil revenues if that comes on stream, and it creates even more opportunity if they start to lay the foundation.
We have to be careful of the Dutch course as well. You know, all producing countries are.
If you don't have Dutch course, happens when you have poor institutions.
Yeah.
And I know you were part of TGI, the Transparency International.
Yeah.
It's important that we fix our institutions, get the courts functioning the way it's supposed to, get the police force,
everything,
get all the institutions in. Listen, if Granger spends
including
5 years,
the Integrity Commission,
all of the Integrity Commission, Procurement Commission,
Audit Office, everything.
If Granger spends his 5 years fixing those institutions, I would personally bow and say you've been a tremendous success.
Let me ask you one final question. We've made a full circle. Your own political future. What are your plans, and do you see yourself contesting in local government elections, which in fact allow for individuals?
Chris, I'm not a fan of the local government system either. You know, I hear Mark Benchop used to say when I was running Blue Caps, I want to run for mayor, and he was going to have. Freddie Kisoon wrote in his column, he can't wait for the debate between Clinton and Mark. It was never going to happen. The way the system is structured, I would run in my constituency. I live in constituency, I think it's one they call it, which is Kingston area there. Mark lives somewhere in South Rumfield there. It's a different I would only compete with somebody in my community, in my district. Mm-hmm. And then if I'm elected to the council, when we meet,
that's where you meet for the mayor.
Citizens don't directly elect your mayor, and that
was a complete ignorance.
That thing has to change. So even if I run as an independent, and if I don't get the support in Georgetown, if you don't get the support from APNU now, there's no chance of anybody becoming the mayor. So if I'm to run and you have any hopes of Clinton Early becoming the mayor of Georgetown, I have to do so under the APNU ban. I'm not going to fool anybody. If I run there as an individual, I'll sit on a council.
But you know that individuals, 50% of the seats are reserved for individuals. So they need you as well. They need you as well. If it's split between, you might very well find a WPA say, look, we will encourage and not go with a big group, AFC. So there is an opening. But my question to you was very direct.
I'm open to that.
So your answer is you are open to that. You haven't turned your back on politics.
I haven't.
And party politics.
I'll tell you, for me, Chris.
We got 30 seconds.
30 seconds. For me, there's lots of demands on me to go international. I'm with FIFA now. So there's lots of options for me to choose from. Guyana's still close to my heart. I'm still young. I say I'll give it maybe 5 years and see what I can do in politics. But 40 or 45, I'll probably go global. But I'm open if you're talking local government elections. I'm a pragmatic, practical person, and I'm open to running with a platform where I think we can best put the best administrators for the city in there, as opposed to putting political folks. And that's the only way Georgetown is going to change.
Mr. Clinton Erling, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with me, for rapping with me over the past hour. It's been quite enlightening. Operators and viewers, thank you, good night. See you next week when we will have David Hines, Dr. David Hines, who will be leaving for the United States after spending about 4 months. He will give us his own thoughts on what those 4 months might have seemed to him and for the future of Guyana. So I look forward to see you then. Have a good night and a good week.